the kindness that outlasts the fire. There is a special kind of courage that goes unnoticed in this world. The courage of someone who continues to love even after they've been burned. Not loud, not glamorous, just quiet, persistent goodness. The kind that holds the door open for someone who slammed it shut the night before. The kind that says, "God bless you," even when their heart is bleeding. The kind that chooses not to mirror the cruelty it has received. You see, we often think of strength as thunder, something loud and commanding. But real strength often whispers. It whispers when it would be easier to scream. It forgives when the wound is still fresh. It chooses decency when bitterness would feel more justified. And if this is you, if you've kept being kind to someone who treated you like you were disposable, you are stronger than you know. You didn't do it for them. Maybe at first you did, hoping they'd change, hoping they'd finally see your worth. But over time, your kindness became something else. It became an offering, not to them, but to God. A quiet act of rebellion against the darkness that tried to harden your heart. You refused to become what hurt you, and in heaven's eyes, that is victory. To others, it may have looked like weakness. They saw the way you stayed, the way you prayed, the way you hoped, and they shook their heads. But God wasn't shaking his. He was writing it down. Every time you could have retaliated and didn't. Every time you absorbed their rage and returned peace. Every time you cried yourself to sleep, but woke up and kept being kind anyway. He saw it all. And let me tell you something profound. Kindness in the face of betrayal is not just goodness. It is glory. It is a glimpse of Christ in you. Because Jesus did not love us when we had our act together. He loved us while we were spitting in his face. And every time you chose love over bitterness, you were echoing the deepest truth of the gospel. Love doesn't quit just because it's not appreciated. So if you've ever asked, did I waste my kindness? The answer is no. Kindness offered in pain is never wasted. It plants seeds in heaven that bloom in God's time. And the one who saw it all, he's not finished. He's preparing a response, not just to the narcissist, but to you, because those who sow in tears will reap in joy. And you, dear soul, have sown more than you realize. When God seems silent, but his silence is sacred. There is a peculiar agony that settles over the soul when kindness is met with contempt. You give what is gentle, you offer what is holy, and in return you are met with manipulation, not just once but over and over again. The narcissist doesn't misunderstand your compassion. They recognize it, and that's precisely why they misuse it. You see, they're not confused, they're calculated. And what hurts the most is not just what they do to you, but what it feels like. God refuses to stop. You've whispered prayers through clenched teeth. You've cried out in the dark, hoping heaven would part the skies in righteous fire. You begged God to show up, not for revenge, but for validation. Just something, anything, to prove that your kindness wasn't wasted. And yet, silence. The kind of silence that makes you question not only the situation, but your own soul. Did you miss something? Did you forgive too much? Are you just being foolish? But let me tell you what the enemy doesn't want you to understand. God's silence is never indifference. It is preparation. His delays are not divine forgetfulness. They are sacred space. Space where character is revealed, where truth separates from illusion, where you, yes, you, are being shaped into someone stronger than pain, deeper than betrayal, and more enduring than anything the narcissist could ever understand. Heaven is not inactive, it is watching. Watching how you respond when your goodness is mistaken for weakness. Watching how you stand, not because you're untouched, but because you're anchored. Watching how your heart stays soft while your boundaries grow stronger. And while it may feel like God is standing still, the truth is that He is allowing the full weight of the story to be told, not just to vindicate you, but to expose what was never real in them. The narcissist thrives on illusion. They curate appearances, manipulate perceptions, and twist narratives. But while they control the external, God is examining the internal. He sees what you cannot, the motives behind their charm, the lies behind their apologies, and the danger beneath their compliments. And He is not just working to stop them. He is working to preserve you. God waits, not because He condones what's being done, but because He values the deeper work, the formation of your spirit, the clarity of your calling, the breaking of old patterns you thought were love but were actually trauma wearing a mask. He is turning your kindness from a mere reaction into a reflection of Christ Himself, sacrificial, wise, and unshakable. So no, your tears have not fallen into a void. They have fallen into the hands of a Father who bottles every one. Your love was not thrown away, it was planted. Your endurance was not in vain, it is being recorded. And when the time is full, when the divine measure has reached its end, He will respond, not just on your behalf, but in such a way that the narcissist's deception collapses under the weight of their own choice. You are not waiting in vain. You are being witnessed by the Judge of all things, and when He moves, you will not need to speak a word. Because your silence, your grace, your refusal to become bitter, all of it will speak louder than any accusation ever could when you've done all you can and God begins what you cannot. There comes a point in every soul's journey where exhaustion and clarity collide. It is not the kind of exhaustion that comes from a hard day's work or a sleepless night. It is the kind that creeps in slowly when you have forgiven the same lie a dozen times, when you have extended grace into a bottomless pit, when you have spoken truth only to be told, "You're too sensitive, too emotional, too much." And finally, after holding your breath for too long, you let out a quiet truth that sounds like defeat, but is actually sacred wisdom. I can't do this anymore. But what if I told you that this moment, this holy breaking, is not your end? What if it is the beginning of God's intervention? You see, God does not force Himself into places where we still believe we can fix things in our own strength. He waits until we surrender, not out of failure, but out of wisdom. When you come to the end of your effort, when you stop trying to prove your worth, to argue with delusion, to rescue someone who doesn't want to be saved, that is when God begins to move in ways that your kindness alone never could. This surrender is not weakness, it is recognition. It is knowing that you are not the healer of their wounds, not the repairman of their broken soul, not the keeper of their consequences. And when you let go, not in bitterness, but in reverence, heaven begins to act. It starts quietly. You may not see fireworks or miracles in the sky, but you'll begin to notice that what once drained you now disgusts you. The same words they used to manipulate you begin to fall flat. Their charm weakens, their power over your emotions loosens. That's not coincidence. That's divine detachment. That's the Spirit of God building a boundary around your heart that even you didn't know you needed. And what of the narcissist, the one who thought your kindness meant they could continue unchecked? God sees their pattern. He sees the smirks they hide when others look away. He sees the calculations behind their fake apologies. And when your grace has been repeatedly weaponized, God steps in. Not because He was slow to act, but because He gave them time to repent, time they squandered, time they mocked. The consequences begin not with thunder, but with unraveling. Their lies begin to contradict themselves. The people they once charmed grow cold. The image they built starts to crack under the weight of truth. And all the while, you are rising. Not because you fought, but because you stopped trying to carry what only God could hold. It is not your job to break them. It was never your calling to expose them. Your role was to walk in love, and when that love was rejected, twisted, and used to control, your role became release. And in that release, heaven roars. Let the narcissist wonder why their power is slipping. Let them scramble for control. Let them try to mirror your goodness, but fail, because it was never in them to begin with. You don't have to curse them. You don't have to correct them. Your endurance has already spoken more loudly than any confrontation ever could. And the best part? You are not alone in this shift. God didn't just watch you suffer. He is now rewriting your story, not just as someone who survived, but as someone who outlasted evil by being faithful. Your surrender is not weakness, it is alignment. And now that you stepped aside, God will do what you could never make happen. He will lift you, and He will bring the truth into light, in His timing, in His way, and for His glory. When God turns the tide and kindness becomes a witness, there is a shift that happens in the spiritual realm long before it manifests in the natural. You won't see it coming, and neither will the one who mistreated you. It begins quietly, not with thunder from the heavens or a dramatic confrontation, but with something far more powerful, the turning of divine favor. And this turn does not begin with punishment, but with truth. The truth about what you endured, the truth about who you really were behind closed doors, the truth about how your kindness was never foolish, it was patient, deliberate, and costly. God does not act in haste, He watches the heart longer than the world is willing to. While others rush to defend appearances, God waits until all masks have been worn thin, until intentions bleed through rehearsed words, and until even the narcissist can no longer hide behind the charm they used to deceive so many. And it is then, when the contrast between your mercy and their manipulation becomes undeniable, that heaven makes its move. This isn't judgment driven by wrath. It's justice rooted in mercy. Mercy that you extended long after it should have been refused. And now, that mercy becomes the very testimony that will justify God's action. You didn't curse them, you prayed for them. You didn't expose them, you covered them. You didn't seek revenge, you hoped for restoration, even as they wounded you again and again. That kind of long suffering is not common. It is holy, and because you did not take matters into your own hands, God now takes them into His. What follows may confuse others, even the narcissists themselves. They won't understand why the people they once controlled are beginning to pull away, why their manipulation doesn't land like it used to, why their image is cracking in places they thought were airtight. But you will understand, because you've felt the shift long before it ever reached the surface. You've seen their charm begin to fail. You've seen their narrative unravel. And it's not because you tried to bring them down, it's because God has decided to raise you up. And while God brings truth to light, He also brings peace to your soul. The kind of peace that doesn't demand apologies or recognition because it already knows the weight of what you carried. Your kindness was not wasted, it was recorded. Not just by God, but by eternity itself. And now it will bear witness to who you were all along. Not a victim who stayed too long, but a warrior who loved too deeply to become bitter. There is no need for you to defend yourself now. Your life will become your defense. Your peace will be your shield. And the same grace that once made you vulnerable will now be the evidence that distinguishes you in the eyes of heaven. So when people ask, what changed? You won't have to say much. The change wasn't loud, but it was complete. God turned the tide, not in anger, not in spite, but in honor of every moment you chose love over retaliation. And the narcissist, they won't be able to explain what's happening, because they never believed kindness could carry the kind of authority that shakes heaven and brings down kingdoms built on lies. But now they will see, because the very mercy they scorned has become the foundation of their reckoning, the protection you didn't see, and the strength you didn't know you had. Sometimes survival doesn't feel like victory. You wake up each morning and go through the motions, but deep down you wonder how you've made it this far. There are no medals for making it through manipulation, no parades for surviving emotional warfare, and the world rarely applauds quiet strength. But God sees what others miss, and He knows that the only reason you're still standing is because He's been holding you up the entire time. You didn't survive because you were lucky. You survived because heaven refused to let you fall. The narcissist may have thought they had the final word. They believed their control over your mind, your emotions, even your faith was unshakable. But they never realized something was surrounding you that they couldn't touch. The hand of God. While they were plotting your breakdown, God was fortifying your spirit. While they were distorting your identity, God was whispering reminders of who you really are. And when you were too exhausted to pray, too numb to hope, too broken to believe in yourself, God was believing in you. He shielded you in ways you didn't even recognize at the time. You thought it was coincidence that the truth began to come out. You thought it was random that people started seeing through the lies. But it wasn't coincidence. It was covering. Every time you walked into a room, they poisoned with slander and still held your head up. That was God. Every time you could have lost your sanity but didn't. That was God. Even in the moments you questioned your own kindness, when you began to feel foolish for loving so deeply, for giving so much, for staying so long, God was not ashamed of you. He was proud that you didn't let the pain rewire your nature, proud that your tenderness outlasted their cruelty, proud that you kept showing up with light even while they were cloaked in shadows. Because while you were being mistreated, heaven was making a record, not of their abuse, that will be dealt with, but of your endurance, of your restraint, of your unwavering decency in a place where decency was mocked. And that record wasn't kept so you could boast. It was kept so that when the time came, God could reward you openly for what you endured in silence. And now, that time is drawing near. You are stepping into a season where the protection that once felt invisible will become undeniable. The narcissist will not be able to reach you the way they used to. The tactics that once worked will fall flat, not because you've hardened, but because God has placed a barrier between your heart and their games. It's no longer your job to protect yourself. Heaven has taken over the assignment. So if you've ever asked, why am I still here? This is your answer. You were preserved on purpose. You were kept alive not to suffer, but to outlive the lie. And now that God has secured your soul, He's going to reintroduce you not as the person who was used, but as the person who overcame. Your kindness wasn't weakness. It was proof that you belonged to God. It's one of the cruelest lies whispered in the aftermath of abuse. You should have known better. That you stayed too long, that you forgave too easily, that you gave too much. And somewhere along the way, the enemy tries to convince you that your greatest spiritual virtue, your kindness, was actually your greatest failure. But don't believe it. That voice doesn't come from heaven, it comes from the one who fears what you carried. Because in a world addicted to pride, retaliation, and performance, you moved differently. You loved, even when love was not returned. You extended mercy long after logic said stop. You spoke gently when it would have felt so good to scream. And maybe you didn't know it then, but each time you did, you weren't proving your weakness. You were revealing your belonging. Your kindness was never meant to fix the narcissist. That was never your job. It was meant to reflect something bigger. The image of a God who loved his enemies, washed the feet of his betrayer, and said, "Father, forgive them," while hanging from a cross. That kind of love doesn't come from personality or habit. It flows from intimacy with the divine. And whether you realized it or not, that's exactly what you were offering, not just to the narcissist, but to heaven itself. The kind of love that bears witness to a higher kingdom. You didn't just survive the darkness, you remained tender in it. You kept your humanity intact. You kept choosing light when bitterness knocked at your door every day. That is not weakness. That is spiritual defiance. And God took note. He saw how you didn't retaliate when you could have destroyed them with truth. He watched how you kept praying for their healing, even as they tore yours apart. He counted the number of times you forgave, not because they deserved it, but because your soul could not afford to be infected by vengeance. Every act of mercy was a declaration, "I will not become what hurt me." And that more than anything proved you were his. The narcissist never understood it. They mistook your compassion for fear, your boundaries for permission, your silence for surrender. But what they couldn't see, what they were spiritually blind to, was that you were never powerless. You were holy. You were covered. You were chosen for something deeper than the moment. And your response was not for them. It was for God. You see, in God's economy, strength is not measured by how loud you shout, but by how deeply you love when it's hardest. And you, who kept loving under pressure, who kept showing up in grace, you passed a test the world doesn't even know exists. And now that the test is over, God is about to release the results, not to punish the narcissist through you, but to honor himself through what you carried. He will lift you up, not because you're better than them, but because you refused to bow to the bitterness they tried to plant inside you. He will defend you, not because you demanded it, but because you bore his nature when no one else did. So hold your head high, not because you won a war, but because you never lost your soul. And that, in the eyes of heaven, is the greatest victory of all. What God will do when your silence has spoken enough. There is a sacred justice that moves slowly, not because it is weak, but because it is thorough. And by the time it arrives, it does not knock. It enters with authority. It does not ask for permission. It comes wearing the full weight of heaven's memory. For a long time you were silent, not because you didn't have words, but because your soul was too worn out to keep defending what your spirit already knew. You weren't crazy. You weren't imagining it. You were being spiritually drained by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate love, how to twist mercy, how to wear a mask of remorse while never truly changing. And still, you stayed. Not because you were weak, but because you hoped. You hoped the love of God flowing through you would reach them. You hoped your kindness would soften them. You hoped your sacrifice would awaken their conscience. But instead of changing, They used your goodness as proof that they could continue. They saw grace as a green light, and God, who sees all things, let it happen, not because he was absent, but because he was building an unshakable case that could not be manipulated, falsified, or undone by charm. Now that time is over. God is not just stepping in to expose what they did. He is stepping in to honor what you did. While they played the role of the righteous in front of others, you carried the weight of reality behind closed doors. While they silenced you with shame, you cried out to heaven in secret. While they smiled in public, you battled in private. And heaven heard every word. The days ahead will not simply be about their consequences. They will be about your elevation. God is not interested in petty revenge. He is interested in divine restoration. He is preparing to show that your tears weren't wasted, your prayers weren't ignored, and your love wasn't foolish. It was faithful. And now that the season of enduring is over, a season of revealing has begun. He is revealing who you are, not the person they reduced you to, but the person he always saw. Strong, gentle, discerning, obedient. A soul who loved with Christ-like mercy, even when it cost you your reputation, your confidence, and your peace. That kind of love is never lost. It echoes in the courts of heaven. It moves the heart of God. And now it has summoned his hand. God will not just correct what was done to you. He will redeem it. He will turn what nearly broke you into the very testimony that frees others. He will use your journey to expose deception and raise up truth. He will turn your silence into a voice of healing, and he will make sure that those who questioned your worth see what he always knew. You were never the broken one. You were the one being broken open, so something eternal could shine through. You don't need to make a statement. Your restoration will say what your words no longer need to. Your peace will preach louder than their performance ever could. Your very presence, healed and whole, will be enough to unravel every false narrative spoken in your absence. God does not let his children be humiliated forever. He allows seasons of silence so that when he speaks, no one can deny his voice. And now he is speaking, not to prove anything to your past, but to launch you into the future he reserved for someone who remained pure when it would have been easier to grow cold. So lift your head, not in pride, but in the awareness that heaven has ruled in your favor. You walked through fire and came out with your soul intact. You loved in a loveless place and did not become bitter. You endured what few saw, and now God will make sure the world sees who you truly are, not the person they painted, but the person he preserved. This is the beginning of a new season, not one built on survival, but on testimony. And every blessing that's coming isn't compensation, it's confirmation. You belonged to him the whole time. You were never defeated. You were being delivered. There is a kind of honor that doesn't come with applause. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or follow the patterns of this world. It comes quietly, like the steady dawn after a long night, and it rests upon those who have been faithful in places where no one was watching. That honor now belongs to you because you endured the unspoken. You loved when it cost you everything. You stayed kind in a war of manipulation. And though it felt like no one noticed, heaven did. God did not just see your tears, he interpreted them. He didn't just count your restraint, he sanctified it. You weren't merely surviving trauma. You were walking through fire without losing your soul. They mistook your silence for surrender. But silence is sacred when it belongs to someone who has nothing left to prove. And your silence, it spoke. It testified before the throne of the Most High. It cried out, louder than accusation, "This one chose love, even here." And that choice echoed through eternity. Now the same mercy you extended will become the platform God uses to elevate you. Not to boast, not to shame them, but to confirm before every spiritual realm that goodness still stands, even when it bleeds. The narcissist may never repent, may never confess, may never acknowledge the truth, but that's not your burden anymore, because heaven already ruled in your favor. And when God vindicates, He does so without needing a courtroom. He lets your healing become the proof. He lets your peace tell the story. This is not just a chapter ending, this is a crowning. Not of pride, but of perseverance. You did not lose yourself in their chaos. You did not drown in their delusion. You did not become what tried to break you, and for that you will rise. Not as someone who escaped destruction, but as someone refined by fire, restored by grace, and rebuilt by the hands of God Himself. Let the world misunderstand your story if it must. Let them question your timeline, your silence, your scars. But know this: the one who authored your soul has already signed His name at the end of your suffering, and His verdict is final. This one is mine, and I will repay, not with vengeance, but with glory. Now walk forward, not to prove anything, but because you no longer need to.